Hey everybody, Tim Bergholz here. Welcome to the latest ChamferZone tutorial. This time we're going to model, unwrap and texture a kukri knife. Every step is covered until we reach this texture version. And for those who want to improve their texture skills even further, there's the extended edition in which we create 10 more AAA quality texture variants to bring your Substance Painter 2 skills up to industry standard level. Let's get started. I have a fresh installation of Max 2017, and the first thing I usually disable is this selection highlight. Customize preferences, and let's get rid of it here in the viewport tab. Under general, let's put our undos to 100, and in the file tab, I'm gonna have autoback set to a 20. Let's confirm that, and let's have a look at our reference image. If you mouse over it, you see it has 2500 by 1000 resolution. And we want to have a plane that equals this size. So I'm going to switch over here to left view, left orthographic view, put it to 250 by 100. It doesn't matter if it's 2500 or 1000 as long as the size is the same. And I'm going to get rid of these segments, confirm that under unit setup we have centimeter set. And now I'm going to take our plane and center it out here, X, Y, and Z. And now I drag the image on here on the plane. The next step is to create a box and give it the dimension of 495, which equals the overall length here of our knife. And now I'm gonna take that plane in the background, scale it down, and also I wanna center that box here. Alt X will make it transparent, and now I can just scale that reference image until we have it pretty much fit here within our overall length. So now we can delete that plane that we had there, or box. And I'm actually gonna create a new box here. And what I'm gonna do with that is put it to 0 on the x-axis. And the width, I'm gonna put it to 0.63 to equal the dimensions that we have here for the thickness. And let's drag that out a bit here, the ref image. I want to put that color to black. Let's open up Material Editor and apply a gray material to it. Just looks better. Next thing, I want to right click that box property and put it to Editable Poly. Let's go in vertex mode and start shifting that box around. I'm gonna drag it all the way here to the left. Select these edges, the horizontal ones, and with Connect Edges, add 3 edge loops. Back to vertex mode. I'm gonna drag these vertices to the critical angles where we wanna have them. Leave a little bit of a space there where I pull these verts for the ultra sharp part of the blade there. And the other verts, I just wanna have a nice edge flow here and also already drag them where they make sense. It does a little bit of this hunch back there, so that's where I put that vert. And this one we may want to bring down a bit so that we have some space there to work with. Gonna have another edge segment there. And also follow what we see there on the ref image. Let's select these 2 verts and align them on the Z-axis so that they are perfectly horizontal. And I'm just gonna continue by dragging these verts here to resemble more our reference. As the next thing, I wanna connect these 2 edges here. And then in face mode, take that face and extrude it out and put the extrusion amount back to 0. So that enables me to drag it out here on the x-axis. And now I'm just gonna make it straight there with a Y alignment. This is what we're working on there, that top part. And let's grab these verts and bring it down a bit to get that angle going there already, where it makes that curve. I'm gonna control backspace these edges here so that they are not in the way for chamfering this here. Let's bring up the chamfer dialog. I'll give it somewhere around 5 edges here and follow our reference image. And in order to get rid of this weird overlapping there, I'm gonna connect these verts. And while we are still in that view, I'm gonna go over to Edge, make a ring selection and press connect. So that leaves us with a perfect connection here in the center. And I'm gonna delete the right side. And the reason why we do that is so that we can now apply a symmetry modifier. Just make sure that the center is really at 0 on the x-axis. So now I'm gonna switch over here to the cut mode and basically freestyle in here the kind of shapes that I see. Gonna take that edge up there because it has this little bevel there. And now I'm just gonna cut in a few more edges here to have that circular shape. And once this is done, I'm gonna switch over to face and select and delete this part here as well as this little one there. And back to our edge mode, I'm gonna make a selection for that. Make sure edge constraint is set to none. And just drag it out a bit and then make sure it's really at 0. Gonna take these two edges and bridge them. And make sure that this is actually welded here in vertex mode, where it came together. Let's zoom in here. And let's cut out this little gap there. I'm gonna have a cylinder here with 18 sides and make sure that your snap settings up there are set to vertex. Now I'm gonna switch over here to our cut mode and just start following these 18 sides here. Every once in a while I'm gonna connect some edges here. Follow it all the way up there. And now we can delete that cylinder, which we don't need anymore. Go over to face mode and just delete that face there. Switch over to border mode, select these edges and convert it into an edge selection and just drag them out like that and also put it to 0 there, down at the coordinates. So now we have like the perfect connection. Let's go back to our left orthographic view and make some more edge connections here. And start refining that curve. Gonna make more edge connections here. I have a shortcut for it as well. But you know where to find the connect if you don't have a shortcut. I still don't want to go like super crazy at that point here with all these curves and edges, but have it already so that we see a proper transformation here in our shape that we want. And especially that part here is crucial because that's where it curves quite a lot on the blade. Let's delete this edge here with Control Backspace. And I'm gonna switch over to cut mode and start working here on that little extension, that gap. Gonna bring that vertex up here. And just, while still being in the cut mode, follow that bevel that we see there on the reference image all the way to here. And let's just target weld that there. Take that back. And now, while being in the vertex mode, I'm gonna cut in another edge loop here, just following that shape at the bottom. Just so that we have a bit more edges to work with. Connect it here. So what I want to do now is first of all bring this vertex up a bit here in my case, and then I'm gonna double click one of these edges to make an edge selection around the whole blade, and I'm gonna deselect it here with Alt, the edges that I don't want. And now with that edge selection active, I'm gonna push these edges downwards so that we have this sharp area of the blade worked out a bit more. Let's zoom in here at the front, and I want to get rid of that face that we have there. And instead, I'm gonna go over to edge mode and just drag these fresh edges out here while having shift pressed. And I'm gonna put them to 0 on the x-axis and use target weld to get these verts here welded. Let me switch to left view and position that here better. And let's go over to edge constraint while being in vertex mode so that we can get a bit more area there where it's supposed to be sharp. Might not be one-to-one with the concept, but it just looks nicer later when we texture it. If there's a bit more of this sharp exposed metal. Also want to bring that up here. Actually, I'm just going to target weld it there. And this one we want to get out of the edge constraint or else it makes trouble, and position it so that it's aligned there with the rest of the upper part of the blade. And the same here. Just want to have a bit of a nicer edge flow there, so some positioning. And that weird shading that we have here indicates that we have weld seam on our symmetry. For the moment, I just want to uncheck that and collapse it, the symmetry modifier, and I'm going to use FDD free modifier. Select these control points, and on the x-axis, I'm going to squeeze it a bit in. And now I'm going to only select the ones here at the bottom, those control points, 9 in total, and also gonna give it that squeeze here to the center. Gonna collapse the FDD modifier. Make an edge selection here on these loops, also on the other side. Convert it to a face selection. And I am again making use of FDD free modifier now on that particular selection here. First, let's start here at the back of the blade. And again on the x-axis, I'm squeezing it in a bit so that the sharp part of the blade is not as thick as we would see it from the top. And I'm just gonna leave it here on these two segments. And these two verts here, we want to just scale them back out a bit. Don't need the FDD modifier for that. And now would be a good time to already apply some smoothing groups here on that selection. But first, what I want to do with it is to push it out here with FDD free modifier and only on these control points there at the front. So that gives us this nice beveled segment that we can see on the concept. Gonna collapse that. Switch back to our face selection that we just had and auto smooth it. And most importantly, this one here needs an auto smooth. And that would be a good time to delete everything that we have here on the right side. And again, use our symmetry modifier. I switch in the top orthographic view here. Make sure we only have a selection for what we want to get rid of here. And then we can make use of our symmetry modifier once again. And also I want to have weld seam unchecked for the moment. And now what I want to do is make an edge selection right there. Open up our chamfer dialog and turn off chamfer smooth. Otherwise it will break our smoothing groups. And now I'm just gonna chamfer these edges here. And I'm going to make another edge selection here. Switch over to edge constraint and push it there to the left and back. It's almost like a fingerprint of the shape that we pressed it against. That's why I sometimes do that. but it still needs a little bit of manual adjustment here. Gonna push it somewhere here. I don't want to get in the way on these teeth down there if you have a look at that, but that's something for later, but already to keep in mind. So I'm just switching back here in between edge and non-edge constraint to work on our topology here. So please pay attention to when I have my mouse over at edge and non-edge constraint. Something that I do a lot depending on what we want to do. Like for example, this one here, if I want to move this down, that would not work when edge constraint was on. And again, edge constraint here, push it a bit to the left side. And some more edge loops here. And without edge constraint, put them up. Just refine that here a bit. Make sure we have a nice edge flow. And I didn't want to do that. Just want to select these two words and shaping our blade here. And I'm going to add another edge here. Bring it down a bit while being in edge constraint mode. Disable it and bring it down a bit so that we have a bit of a curve there going. And I'm also going to add another edge loop here under our sawtooth or whatever this element would be called, so that later it's easier for us to work up there. A few more edge loops here. And it's always important to work on our silhouette. We want to make sure we don't have any noticeable low poly elements here. This knife is supposed to be for first person use. So we want to make sure it's as smooth as it can be. Also adding a few edges here in the front, and I'm just going to connect them. Remember, I have a connect shortcut. You will find it on the right side. It's just called connect if you don't have that shortcut. And further refinement here on our edge flow. So the next thing is to go back to the symmetry modifier. And this time I'm gonna put the weld seam on. I'm gonna have a minimal threshold of 0.01. Just less chance that something gets welded that we don't want to weld. And I will make a edge selection again all around here and deselect everything that's not part of the sharp element. So that leaves us with a edge selection for that here. And now I want to give this edge selection here a chamfer. That is way too much, so I'm going to bring that amount down. Also disable that smooth thing there again, which is very annoying. And I'm going to confirm that, but something doesn't seem right there in the center. So first of all, let me auto smooth this selection that we have here. Now I'm going to switch over to edge, make a ring selection here at the center. Let me just deselect the ones that are okay. Like I like this there at the front, but this here looks a little weird. It's not regular there. So let me go back here in FDD free modifier and select the center segment and just give it a good squeeze here. Maybe a little bit here on that side as well. And in that segment, I want to scale it to the outside, just to have a bit more of this natural curve going on there that you would expect from a knife. Let me make another ring selection here at that part that we just chamfered and convert it to face. And let's have a look around. Actually, what I'd want to do first is double click that edge there and get rid of the entire edge loop that we have there at the center. Make another ring selection, convert it to face, and now I want to deselect again everything that's not the sharp side of the blade. And with that active selection here in face mode, I will then use our FDD free modifier and further bring that sharp part down a bit. Let's drag these control points so that we don't lose too much of our edge flow. Can't really do much about it here, but we can always fix that later. Collapse the FDD. And now, like I was saying, make sure that the edge flow is nice. Gonna connect that here. Gonna take these front vertices here. And I think I want to push them a little bit more down. Just a slight amount. And make sure you're not in edge constraint mode while also working a bit more here on that curve. And also, I want to make that a little bit more curved. See how it says 4 edges. We don't have our symmetry modifier on anymore, so we are actually selecting multiple edges on the other side as well while we work on that. And I'm just gonna make it a bit more curved here. And I want to connect a few words here. Again, I'm using my connect shortcut. And also here, I want to connect that. Make sure we have it also here on the other side. Okay, gonna press connect. And now it would be time to work on these teeth here. So I'm going to create a cylinder for that. And you want to make sure that that cylinder really goes all the way through our geometry there on the top. I'm going to convert it to an editable poly. I have 16 sides here on that cylinder. And now I'm going to use FDD2 modifier to get that cylinder going in the same kind of shape that we see there in the background. Going to collapse it. And let me make a connection here so that I see how many edges exactly we would have later once we boolean that. Don't want to create extra words that we don't want. And under tools and array, I am now going to clone that thing a few times. 7 times. And make sure that we have the right amount here. And notice how I had that edge connection there in the center. I don't want that to be under that edge from the actual blade, so that once again we don't create more polys that we actually need. And I'm going to attach all these things together now, so we have one element for them. The color doesn't matter at all, because we're going to use compound objects and ProBoolean. I want to have no edge removal checked. Start picking it, and that already gives us exactly what we want here. Now we can collapse that ProBoolean, and that brings us back to our editable poly. And as you can see, ProBoolean made a huge mess there with the words. And I want to just slice it in half, so we only have to clean it up on one side. So go in top perspective, use our slice plane, and I have split checked as well. Gonna use the angle snap here and make sure that the slice plane is perfectly centered. And now we can just get rid of the other side there and start just cleaning that up, vertex by vertex. In that case, you don't want to click Control Backspace. You really just want to remove it by pressing Backspace only. Make sure you delete the right vertices. You don't want to delete one that actually is part of our geometry here. Just the ones that got additionally created. And until today, I don't know of a better way to boolean without creating that mass. Maybe I'm missing something, but not that I heard of. And I think we are halfway through here. I'm gonna target weld that here. Already did it earlier, didn't mention it. And let me zoom in here. Forgot some vertices here. Make some more connections here. You can see I'm not too concerned about having quad geometry everywhere, at least not on the low poly. It's a good thing to have it, but in some cases it would only cause us a lot of extra polygons, which would not make any difference. Our high poly will be all quads later, thanks to the modifiers that we use for it, and we'll have the perfect baking results. Keep in mind whatever you check into the game engine, speaking of the low poly, will get triangulated there anyway. Since it's a question that I get asked a lot, I will release a special Ngon video soon on YouTube. Meanwhile, I added the symmetry modifier back here. And I'm going to make a face selection here of that part of the blade. Symmetry it over and use our FDD free modifier. I'm gonna select these upper control points here, the first two segments, and give it a good squeeze. Just so that it looks a little nicer there, not so thick. Let's toggle it. And let's open it up a bit more there. That makes it look a little bit more elegant up there, not so super bold. And now it would be time to also use the boolean again and create a lot of unnecessary verts that we have to delete afterwards. And again, I'm using 16 sides here. And same procedure as up there. I'm gonna use my FDD modifier. And just shape it so that it resembles the look of our reference image for where we want to perform the boolean operation. Gonna collapse that, and again I'm going to connect it here in the center. That's where I want to make the cut. And let's array it again. I'm actually going to copy it over 5 times, because 4 doesn't seem enough there for this kind of a saw element that we want to have. I actually don't even know what it's supposed to be good for. Maybe you can saw something with it or chop, but in the end it's all about looking cool. Remember, it's for first-person shooters, so whatever you want to use it for later, maybe just for your portfolio or add it to Fallout. As long as it looks cool, that's what we want. And let's attach this here. And then it's time for our Proboline again. Compound and Proboline. Start picking, and there we go. Collapse it down to editable poly, the Boolean operation. And same thing as earlier, I just want to slice it again here in the center. Slice, and now we can just grab it and delete one of the sides. So we don't have to do that work twice, basically. And I often just select multiple vertices here while having Control pressed. And then every once in a while I hit the backspace key to delete them. Almost through. And again, I'm going to connect a few edges, get rid of that one. Actually, let's put it here. And then we're gonna have a connection over to that side. Nicer edge flow. Same here. This edge here, Control backspace. And just some more connections here. This one, actually, I want to bring it a bit to the left so that it follows better that circle shape. And again, time for symmetry modifier. And now I want to chamfer this here. So I'm going to double click it. Bring up the chamfer dialog. Again, disable that auto smooth thing there, or else it breaks our smoothing groups. And let's have a look at the silhouette. I want to bring it a bit in there. And for the moment that covers it here with a blade, we will return to it later. For now, let's open up the Essential folder. And in order to work on the grip, we want to drag in the straight grip reference image. That just makes it easier for us to work on it here. I'm gonna have a cylinder with 18 sides. Rotate it over here 90 degrees. The second thought, let's give it 20 sides and collapse it down to editable poly. And same as earlier, I want to have it with black edges and a gray material to it. Let's make a connection here in the center. Also here on that side. And then we can delete the right side, or depending from how you look at it. Let me select these edges here and Control backspace them. And these ones here, I want to chamfer. I just used the shortcut for it. Symmetry modifier back on. And let me select that reference image, go into the object properties and enable the backface cull so we don't always have to struggle with that when we look on the other side. Gonna delete these front and back faces there of this element. And I'm gonna press Alt Q here together with the reference image. So we have that in isolation mode, so we can only focus on that. Drag it out to both sides and add some edge loops here to work with. And another edge loop that I bring here to that point where we have that bevel, this one here. And now where we have this groove, I'm gonna put an inset. So over there, inset, I have a shortcut for it. Around here, bring that a little bit to the side. And this one, I'm gonna use the FDD modifier here. FDD2. Bring it back a bit and collapse that. Add another edge loop here, and while being in the edge constraint, I'm gonna push it there on that edge again. And now, like I said before, we have that kind of a footprint there that perfectly follows it. I want to give that a bit of a curve, so I'm going to chamfer that here. Double chamfer. And the same here on that side. Now we created a bit of a mess here, so I'm gonna turn vertex snap on. And then with a cut tool, going to reconnect these open gaps so that we have our old edge flow there back in place. And then with Control Backspace, I'm gonna get rid of these edges there that we don't need and reconnect where it makes sense. So here, for instance, and I want to collapse these two edges there that I just selected. And let's do the same here on that side. Also collapse these two edges. Just makes it for a nicer edge flow there. Let me undo that here for a second. Connect it up there. That looks about right. Just gonna get rid here of the side that we haven't worked on and put our symmetry modifier back on. And now I'm gonna take these faces here that we were producing with our inset earlier, and with the lower control points, I'm gonna push it up a bit. And a little bit here to the side and collapse again. And now I'm going to convert that into edges here. Deselect the horizontal ones and chamfer that shape. Convert it back to faces and auto smooth it. And I want to have another edge loop here in the center. Connect and align it on the Z-axis. And let's work on that part there on the top, as well as there at the bottom where the metal goes in. So I'm going to select these faces here. And I will select a few more there at the bottom. And now I'm going to give it a bit of an inset. And you'll see the reason for that in the top view here. I'm going to convert it over to a vertex selection and give it a bit of a scale to the inside so that it aligns perfectly with the blade that we have there. So now I can go back to face and delete it. And I also want to delete these two faces that we have there at the front due to the inset that we did. And now what I want to do is to bridge these edges here together on both sides. And I'm going to switch over to border mode and press my cap shortcut on it. And that leaves us with these vertices here that we can now connect properly. I'm going in the wireframe mode, which is F3 by the way. And now you can see that saved us some time. We didn't have to bridge them all individually. And on that part of the grip here, where we have this groove, I want to make a face selection, grow it, and convert it over to a vertex selection. And now I'm just going to deselect those particular vertices here, because as the next thing, I'm going to use FDD2 modifier and use the control points here at the bottom, switch over to scale and give them a bit of a push in. So from that view, you can see we have a nicer shape going there now. And while I'm at it, I'm gonna give that here also a little bit of a push. And now I'm just gonna select the upper control points and also give it a bit of a push in. So let me collapse that. And next I want to straighten that here on the Z-axis. And border mode and cap again to fill that here with geometry. And now what I actually want to do, I want to delete these faces here, bridge these here, as well as that. And you'll see why in a moment. Also bridge it here. The reason is that now we can use inset here on the front part of that grip and give it a bit of a bevel there. So like this here. And that edge loop, maybe I'm gonna give it a slight chamfer so that it's really nice and round there at the front. That looks about right. Bit of a push there to the front. And again, just refining it a bit here. So now we can just get rid of these faces again that we just used so that we have a even bevel there. I'm just gonna border and cap it back together. And as a next thing, let's go over to Edge and use our slice tool, slice plane actually, just to quickly get another edge loop in there that's perfectly horizontal, at least for the moment. And I'm gonna make a few more edge connections here and just start working a bit here on that shape at the back as well. Let me go over here to the edge mode, edge constraint mode, and bring it down a bit. And I'm going to add another edge loop here again. Bring it a bit to the left and apply FDD2 modifier here on that, so that we can get again a nice straight shape going there with an angle. And more of that here. And collapse. And let me grab these vertices here. FDD2 modifier. And transform that grip a bit more according to the reference image. And I'm going to add another edge here, edge loop. Bring that over and use the rotation to get a bit more of an angle there. And while being in vertex mode, I'm gonna drag that down here. Take these verts and also give them a bit of a rotation. And I want to select these edges here, make a connection there and bring it up a bit. And let me make an edge selection here all around this part and give it a bit of a chamfer. Confirm that. And the same here, I want to chamfer that. We're creating a little bit of a mess here, but that's just the natural process of modeling. So for instance, now we can collapse these edges here. And the same here with these edges. Gonna collapse that and take these upper edges and bring it to the back a bit. Gonna control backspace those there and bring that to the other side. I want to straighten those vertices here on the z-axis. And then again, just collapse these edges there on the top. Also straighten these verts here. And those ones, let's bring them down a bit. And let me switch over to border and then cap this here at the back. And I'm going to connect these here from left to right. And now I'm just going to give it an inset, which I'm going to also push out. And another inset here. Let me collapse these two edges here. And this one, maybe later. Let's just push that out here first, like that. And that looks a little messy there, so I'm just removing these edges. Same as this one here, and I'm going to connect a few things. And now I want to work on that shape here, that groove. Go over to left orthographic view, make sure we have a face selection on both sides for exactly that. And I'm going to auto smooth it. Connect that here, and now I'm going to select these edges on both sides, convert it over to a vertex selection, go into the scale mode and bring that in a bit. And the same here for the edge loop that's right under it, or at least these 6 edges here in particular. Also want to scale that in a bit. So we don't always have to use FDD modifier. There are always a lot of ways to do a certain thing. And now that I look at it here in X-ray, I want to cut that hole in there, and these edges are in the way at the moment. So I press Ctrl Backspace to get rid of them. Create a cylinder, for which I'm using 18 sides again. And I want to make sure there's no rotation on it whatsoever, so that now I can collapse it to an editable poly, grab the right side of it, and just drag these verts here to the side. Position it a bit better there. And with this in place, I'm going to add another edge loop here, connect, switch over to edge constraint and make sure that it's perfectly vertical there. And over there, I want to add at least 2 more edges. So I'm going to connect one, straighten it, and then I'm going to give it a chamfer. Let's use the chamfer dialog for it. And now we have some more possibilities here to switch over to vertex and snap mode. And the snap mode is set to vertex like last time. And now we can just connect this new shape that we created there with our transformed cylinder. And once this is done, we can then delete that face that we created here. And I'm also gonna get rid of that cylinder. And while being in border mode, I wanna make sure I'm not in edge constraint. We can then push that in here, drag new geometry out. On a second thought, let me fill that with geometry again here. And now I'm using inset and push it in like that. Delete that face, and now with border mode, we can then continue to pull out some fresh geometry, which I'm setting to 0 on the X coordinates. So now we have a nice bevel there. And some more vertex connections. Let's give that a little bit of a pull up there. And same as we had it a few times before, I want to slice it here and get rid of the side that we haven't properly worked on. And now that I look at this here, it's pretty low poly. So I'm going to make a ring selection on it here throughout the whole thing. Open the ribbon up and flow connect it. Flow connection makes it automatically round. And also here I want to add a flow connect. And let me check with the symmetry modifier here. This could also be rounder, so I'm going to use more flow connect on that. And let me use the slice plane here on this one. Make sure split is not activated while we slice. And that's just another way of quickly adding an edge loop in there. And I also want to have one over here, as well as over here, just to have some more geometry that we can work with. And let's just shape it a bit more. And it looks a little crowded here on the left side, so I will collapse these edges here. And back to vertex mode, I just want to make sure we have a nice shape there that resembles our reference image, as much as we can make out of it. That looks about right. And now I'm gonna control backspace this edge, because what I want is to create that metal cap element there at the back. And I'm gonna use cut tool here for it. Connect it like that. And I actually want to have that as geometry there, that screw element. Like, you could argue that this could just be a floater, but I want that to be actual geometry. We don't have that many polys on the whole thing to begin with, so we can definitely make some use of actual geometry here. So I'm using another cylinder here. Well, 2 cylinders to be exact, but let's start here on the right side first. And same procedure as before, I'm going to use my snap tool in vertex mode to connect that. You could also use the Boolean operation, but I'm just too tired of cleaning that always up. So in some cases, I prefer this method that I'm using here. Always depends how much it is that you have to do. And now we can just delete that cylinder here. And I think I'm gonna give it another inset here. Push it in a little bit, and that messed up because I still had snap mode on, which you can toggle with S. And what I want to do with that thing is grow that selection and give it an auto smooth already. And let's do the same thing here on that side. So once again, vertex and over to cut mode and snapping enabled. And that allows us to quickly follow around that shape here. And once we have that, I'm going to delete our cylinder here. And now that I think about it, I actually want to delete this geometry that I created there, cap it back, and select both of these things here. They have the same dimension, and I'm just gonna use inset on the both of them. Push it in, so we don't have to basically do that twice here, that operation, or at least we are sure that it has the same kind of inset amount. So I want to have these faces selected here, and I will use our ring selection on it, convert it over to face and grow that selection. And also I want to select that again here. Let me grow it all together, and now auto smooth with an angle of 35. make sure we have the right smoothing group set there. Gonna invert that face selection, Control I. Also use Auto Smooth on it with 35. And now individually, I want to give these grooves here a smoothing group. So I just made an edge selection, converted it to face, and select the remaining polys that we have there. Auto Smooth that. And here in that case, I'm just gonna select it like that. You can always just select it like that if you want, but sometimes it's easier to make an edge loop and convert it to face, and that already gives you basically a selection that you want. And that looks pretty good here with the smoothing groups. See with the symmetry modifier. And that looks like it's not perfectly aligned there. So I'm going to take these edges, align it on the, let's see which one, the Y. Actually, it's the Z. Now we have them all through. And the same here on that one. Align it on Z. And let's see what we do next. I will then drag our old reference image back on. And by old reference, I just mean the one where the handle has already that curve. Gonna add another edge loop here. Give us a little bit more of options. Another edge loop. And now I'm just gonna take all these vertices here. Oops, and I was in edge constraint mode. I want to disable that. And then in rotation, I'm gonna give it a bit of a twist here to follow our actual curve that we want to have there. And now we can refine that a bit more, grab some of these vertices, bring it also down. And the same goes here for the upper back of that handle. And certainly down there, we have some more work to do in order to get that shape all nice. And that also, I want to give it a bit of a push down. Always important to look at that silhouette and make sure it's not pinching too much. No obvious low poly edges visible. So that's why the silhouette is so important. I want to take these vertices here and bring them down a bit. Because if you look at the reference, you will see that this is actually on the same level almost as the metal. At least right there at the front. So that makes it as close to our reference as we can. And let me switch to edge constraint so that we can take this vertex down here a bit more in order to keep these edges more straight than they were. And the same goes for these ones here. It's always good to keep our edges as straight as possible. And I'm gonna auto smooth that here so that it already resembles more the shape that we see there. And I will then take these edges here at the back and pull them back a little bit more. And also this vertex here. Let me collapse the symmetry modifier for now so that it's easier to work with that geometry here. Especially when performing a FTD operation. So I select these verts here in the back and I just give it a little bit of a push to the center on the x-axis so that we don't just have one block there, you know. And I'm also going to take these vertices here and I also want to select these ones here And now again with the FDD2 modifier, I'm just going to select those control points at the bottom and also push it a bit more. So now we have this nice shape, which looks just better than just having this cubical shape there for the grip. I'm going to connect these edges there with a cut tool. And that looks a low poly to me, so I'm going to use the flow connect. And let's switch over to left orthographic view again. And let's see about our silhouette here. May want to bring that down here a little bit. Make sure you don't have edge constraint on while doing that. And let's just work a little bit more here on our silhouette and edge flow. Using the rotation tool here as well to push it in a certain direction. And I may want to use the phase selection here on this end segment. And I will switch over to local mode. If you press Control and right click, you can easily switch to local mode. And then it's easy just to push it a little bit more in there. So I will go out of the local mode again, back to our view mode, and just push it further down here. Rotate it a little bit. Or actually, I just undid that. Let's just push it down. And also here, I want to give it a bit of a twist so that it follows more of a curve there at the back. It's not perfectly straight. And just working on the silhouette here. I just noticed that these things here look a little bit too bumpy, so I just aligned them and bring them a little bit more down. And while being here in the front view, I will just delete the right side. But before I put the symmetry modifier back on, I want to work here on that front piece. And if you look at the ref image, it follows this curve, which at the moment we don't have. So I want to add a few extra edges here. 3 of them. And maybe bring them over here a bit to the left side. And now with the FDD3 modifier, I will then just take these control points here and bring it up. Give it a bit of a rotation here in the center. And that's basically it for that curve. I will then flip it over to the other side with our symmetry. And what we were just doing there at the back with this curve, I want to do the same thing at the front to a certain degree. So what I'm going to do is switch over to edge mode. And first of all, I want to have a ring selection here through these edges. And I'm going to connect it with another edge loop here. Straighten that while being an edge constraint. And let's connect it over here as well. We will never actually see that in the game there, this part, so we don't really have to pay too much attention as long as it's all connected there. And now with these edges in place, I can then make a selection and switch over to FDD4. Sorry, FFD4. And now with only the outer control point selected, I bring it in a little bit here. And I will then collapse it. Collapse 2 on the modifier enables us to still maintain the symmetry modifier on top. And now we have a bit of a nicer shape here. Zooming in reveals that we have a bit of a strange shading there. And I just want to get rid of that edge here. Control backspace and reconnect the edges in a different way here, which already fixes it. And also I want to smooth this circle there. So what I'm going to do is make a ring selection, convert it over to face mode and auto smooth. And while we are zoomed in on that region, see how this is a bit more chamfered there than we have it now. So in order to do that, I'm going to also control backspace on these two edges and just give it a chamfer. It's easier if we don't have any edges there in the way. That's why I just got rid of them. And now with this selection here, just made another ring selection. I'm just going to give it auto smooth with a 45-degree angle. And that concludes it for the moment here for our low poly model. So what I want to do is select what we have here, make a copy of it, bring up our scene explorer, and with our copy selection still active, I'm just going to create a new layer. And I'm going to call that highpoly. And I'm going to hide it. And that leaves us here with our low poly. So I'm going to create another folder or new layer. Call that low poly. And then we can just hide the low poly, activate our high poly folder here, close the scene explorer, and continue working here on our high poly. Just gonna push the reference image back a little bit. Was too close the whole time actually. So let's start here with a blade. Let me bring to your attention the display hard edges checkbox, which shows all our smoothing groups. Wherever we have a green edge, that means that's the border region of a smoothing group. And in the past, we would then take that chamfer modifier and just let it work around our smoothing groups like that here, in combination with our turbo smooth. And I just noticed I don't have it in my modifier set, the turbo smooth. So let me just add that to it here. So in the past, we would have then just added the turbo smooth here and refined our smoothing groups until we get that nice high poly look that we want to have. Minus some issues that we have to sort out, like making some edge connections here to get that overlap here worked out. So basically that would be the old method that we would have worked here to approach the high poly. We can then change our crease. And that's also my preferred method. However, I want to work with the open subdiv in that tutorial, just to show you a different way to approach that. And we won't be needing the chamfer or turbo smooth for it at all. So what we're gonna do is first of all have the open subdiv modifier here on top. And now it's all about working with our hard edges. The hard edges are the ones that show green here on the blade, which are defined through how we set our smoothing groups earlier. So I want to go over to edge mode with the ribbon on here. And under the selection tab, we have this thing that says hard edge, or it just says hard. So clicking that will actually make a selection for our hard edges. And I will just start by putting the crease amount to 1. And now you can see if we put the iterations all the way up, we pretty much already have this kind of an effect that we had before with the chamfer plus turbo smooth. And zooming in reveals now that we have some work to do here. We got some overlaps, and that's because those edges were not properly connected on the high poly, where it's really essential to have it. So I'm just going to start connecting some edges here. Select 2 vertices with Control and Connect. And I still have my open subdiv on top, so I can see what I'm doing while I make these connections here. And I put the crease amount to 1, which is the absolute hardest. So once we have that, we're gonna have to refine it a bit more, because right now it's a bit too strong looking. And we wanna make sure we have some normal map information later. So those crease values are crucial to getting the best result. Let me also do it over here. Make some connections. And almost done here. this one with that one. And we got some more over there that I forgot. So I'm gonna connect it over here. This one down there. And this one here to the left. So now we don't have any overlapping stuff happening here. Last one over here. And now I'm afraid we have to do the same thing here at that part. Because wherever you have these cutout shapes that we produced earlier when we were running the Boolean operation, it's very likely to have this kind of overlapping geometry unless we connect our edges properly. It's exactly the same that we would get if we work with Chamfer plus TurboSmooth. And in order to avoid that, we just need to make sure our highpoly has all the edges where we want them. And the thing about OpenSubdiv is that it's all depending on the distance from the edge where we have our crease on to the next edge. So maybe we have to add a few more extra edge loops here and there in order to get the kind of look that we want. For example, here, what I want to do is take those faces and give it a bit of an inset. And that will prevent it from looking as weird as it did before there. Just gonna bring that edge down here as well. And this one, I'm gonna collapse it. Let's see where our collapse is hiding, over here. And now you can see that the inset was messing up our smoothing groups. So I'm going to grow that selection that we just had here, give it one smoothing group. And you can see how now we have the green borders again right there at the end where we want to have them, and not there somehow in the where we put the inset. So I'm going to make a few more extra edge connections here. And also here, I'm going to connect these edges and add a few extra loops, just so that we have a bit more geometry here to work with. And now it should work better already with our OpenSubdiv. However, now it's also crucial for us to select these hard edges again and put the crease amount back to 1. However, we don't want to leave it at 1 now. So it's time to think about where we want to have a certain amount of a bevel or smoothing or crease, however we want to call it. And I have that selection active here for all our hard edges. And I just deselect the ones that I don't want to affect now here. So let me just deselect it here. I have Alt pressed while I deselect, by the way. And let's just make a selection here, everything that's red, that we're going to affect now. And I'm going to put the crease amount. Let me also deselect the ones here. For our current active selection, I'm going to put the crease to 0.2. And now if we enable OpenSubdiv, you will notice that it looks much rounder or smoother there, which just means that we're going to catch more normal map information. And at the bottom part here, I still have it at 1, which means it's really sharp, right? And that's what we want for our blade there. So it's really a matter of thinking, okay, what kind of a crease do we want to have at what place? And for now, I'm happy with our blade, so I will go back to our handle here. And I want to work a little bit more here on these screw elements. So I'm gonna have another inset here. I have both selected because they are exactly the same dimension. And I'm gonna push that inset out a little bit. You could probably also use the bevel or extrusion, but in the end, there are always multiple ways. I'm gonna auto smooth that little ring selection that we had there. And as the next thing, I want to give it another inset. Make that a little smaller so that we actually see the same thing sort of that we have in our reference image there in the background. And now what I want to do is use our cut tool and connect that over here from there to there. And now we can just get rid of these edges. Control backspace. And I want to do the same thing over here, just from a different angle, so that it doesn't look like it's exactly the same thing, just copied. And now that we have that, I will take these face selections here. Actually, together with these small faces that we have there. And then I'm just gonna give it a bevel here. So let's put that amount to 0 and also down there. And then we can refine it a little bit more. If you press Alt, you can make really refined parameters. So that's what I would recommend there. And that looks a little messed up here. So I'm just gonna take these two words and give it a, where do we have it? Collapse it. Same as here. And the same thing probably needs to happen over here. That's a very common thing when you do the bevel, that often where you have edges very close by each other, that it does this weird intersecting thing. And I'm gonna push that out a little bit. So with this active selection here, we can then press grow, which did the same thing automatically on the other side. And now we can auto smooth it. And also these faces here, we want to make sure we assign smoothing groups to them. They don't have any yet because it's fresh geometry that we just created on top of our existing one. And these smoothing groups are crucial for our hard edges. Let's check them. And that should work well with our open subdiv. So the next thing that I want to do is work on these elements here, these grooves in the low poly, or I should say high poly, but later we're gonna bake it into our low poly in the normal map. And for the case you wonder where the blade went, I still have it in isolation mode together with our reference image here. And now with a new plane, I'm just gonna draw something there that looks like it has the dimensions that we see on these little groove things. Gonna convert it over to editable poly. And I will then add 4 or let's say 5 of these edges here. And now I'm gonna use our FDD free modifier on that and scale it a little bit here in the center. And I'm gonna scale it back here on the top. So now we have this nice oval shape, and I'm gonna use my inset on it. And I'm gonna connect that here, make a ring selection and connect it. And let me quickly think how to do that. Gonna push that in here and make some more use here on that edge selection with our FDD free modifier. Collapse that and auto smooth that, and Control I makes an inverse selection, and I'm also gonna auto smooth it. And now we can use our chamfer modifier. Put it to unsmooth edges. And let's use our turbo smooth on it. Gonna scale it a bit more here on the X or on the Y axis. And also here with the border mode, and I'm gonna press Shift. I'm gonna drag some fresh geometry out here to the side, convert it to faces and auto smooth it. And that gives it a bit more of that bevel there at the borders where we want to have it. Let me just also give it a gray material here with a black wireframe. And now let's switch over to left orthographic view. I'm gonna position it here on the right side, scale it a bit more, rotate it, and now with the array, let's put the preview mode on. I'm gonna have 10 of them. Actually, I'm gonna have 9 of them. And let's make sure that it has the same distance here. And now I'm gonna just take it one by one and scale it individually. That might not be the same as on our reference, but in the end it looks better if we have something that really fits our handle there. And I'm just gonna individually scale them. So it looks more like it actually follows our shape here. This one a little bit up and that one a little down. And let's have a look at it from the top perspective. I want to just bring them as close to our geometry as we can. Those floater objects. And let me press Alt and go over to local mode so I can scale it here individually on these 3 objects on the x-axis to make it a little thicker. Let's zoom in here on that part. Gonna control backspace this edge, select these 2 vertices here, and I wanna give them a bit of a chamfer so that we have a nicer curve going there. Because just in a bit, we are going to extrude in there so that we have actual depth, like high poly depth for our normal map later on. For the moment, I'm just gonna already connect a few more edges here. And also, I wanna make a ring selection around that here, convert it to face and auto smooth it. Remember, our green edges display where we have our smoothing groups. So that makes it really easy to see where we have them and where we don't have them. And most importantly, we just want to have them in place where we have these hard edges as seen on the reference images. And it's pretty much the same workflow that we used in the other tutorials for the case that you followed my other tutorials, where we use the chamfer and the turbo smooth. Only difference, we are working now with the hard edges here. So now I'm just gonna assign some more smoothing groups here, also at the front. And now we go over to our symmetry modifier and collapse it. And I don't know why it sometimes looks so weird, our hard edge display. I think it's a bug. So if you get that, don't be too worried. Our hard edges are perfectly in place. And actually I want to have a ring selection here on that part. And also give that an auto smooth here. And these ones here, I'm gonna give it an individual smoothing group. Let's just make sure that this has also an individual smoothing group here. And now let's look at it again, perfectly in place. And what I want to do now is go over here to left view and select all these faces that are part of this metal cap at the back of the handle. And I'm actually going to use the inset now on it. And what that does is it leaves us with a bit of an extra edge loop there. If you zoom in, I'm going to take that, make a ring selection, connect it, and now I'm going to use the push modifier. And that gives us exactly the kind of high poly detail that we want to have there. With that selection still active here, I'm going to convert it over to face and give it an auto smooth. And I'm actually going to lower the angle a little bit there on the smoothing group for this one, just so that we really have separate smoothing groups for those angles there. And now what I want to do is go over to our ribbon again and select all these edges here. Give it a 0.3 crease, not too hard, but just the right amount here for our handle, which consists mostly out of plastic and some metal element there. And that looks pretty good. I think I'm gonna put the iterations up to 4, just to give it just more tessellation. And I wanna have something that looks like there's a seam going through, at the bottom at least. So I'm gonna have a selection here just for these parts there at the bottom. I want it to look as if that is actual plastic or something like that that got welded together there. That's where the seam would be. Gonna put that here to 0, the extrusion amount, and then with Alt, I make a very small selection here. Convert it over to face, and also I want to give it an auto smooth. Now the only downside is that whenever we do that, we have to select our edges again, and I'm just gonna put 0.3 again in it. And now let's have a look at it. And that's pretty much it here for the handle. And that means that it's time to do some unwrapping now. The first thing that I'm gonna do is bring back our low poly folder here. And I also wanna hide our reference image, which is really just in the way. We don't need it anymore. So the next step might be a little confusing. I'm going to collapse the symmetry, and I'm going to overwrite our smoothing groups that we had on the low poly. I'm going to explain why in just a moment. For now, let's just also delete that edge loop that we have here in the center. And now I'm going to open up our UVW map editor. And we have a really cool feature here. It's called Flatten by Smoothing Groups, and we're just gonna click that. The cool thing about it is that now we have exactly the kind of UV islands in place already that our smoothing groups defined. And a 45-degree angle usually results in the perfect bake as well. So that's why I overwrote these smoothing groups. And we will continue by taking those stripes here and rotating them so that they are facing a horizontal direction, which is mostly a matter of preference. I just prefer to have my stuff laid out horizontally and not vertically. And let's bring up the material editor, and I want to open up the diffuse and add a checker pattern here. Let's enable it. Make sure you have the material assigned actually. Let's put the tiling amount to 70. So now we have a nice checker pattern here, and we better see what we're actually up to. Let's put these elements here a little bit apart. So let me switch over to edge mode. And I also want to get out of the element mode. And now I'm going to have a loop selection here on those. And I'm going to straighten it here. So it's always the best habit to leave our edges as straight as possible. I'm going to do the same thing here. Loop it and straighten it here horizontally. And also here I want to do that, but I don't want to have that end piece there. Just here on these. And as a next thing, I'm just going to select all that small stuff that we have here. And I'm going to press the relax on it. And I'm also gonna make use of our peel mode, which pretty much does the same as the relax, but it does it better. And now I'm just gonna collapse it, collapse all, and reopen the UVW editor, because to be honest, I don't know how to get rid of these blue control points of the peel mode if I don't do that. I'm gonna use the align tool here. Just press align so that we have our UV islands perfectly laid out there. Gonna have to do that for everything. And we have a few more pieces up here, same thing. Aligning this. And let us unwrap that piece here that came out a little bit weird with the auto unwrap. If we look at it, it's a perfect cylinder. So we use cylindrical map here on a projection and best align. And now what I want to do is uncheck normalize map at the bottom right corner here. And I'm going to use our rotation to hide that seam a bit more. Uncheck cylindrical map projection, and that basically is it. I'm gonna use rescale elements on everything. That is one of the most important buttons that we need to make use of. And now if you look at our checker pattern, you can see that we have the same texel ratio on everything. I'm going to collapse that UVW modifier, isolate our handle as the next thing. And one thing that will make the work a little easier is to uncheck symmetry so that we only unwrap one half first. So I'm going to just collect everything here and press the quick planar button on it. So that results in the whole handle being one UV island, which we don't want. So we need to have a look here at the pieces that need to be their own UV island, such as that piece right there. And just for the sake of separating it out, I'm gonna press quick planar map on it. Doesn't matter if there's stretching at that point, we're gonna fix that later. And these pieces here look like a good case for flatten mapping, which pretty much already does the perfect job. There's not much left for us to do in terms of stretching. This one, let's also use quick planar map. And then we have that cap at the back that also makes more sense to have as a separate UV island. And also quick planar map on it. So with that being done, let's select that actual handle that we have here, the biggest part of it at least. And I want to make sure that we use peel mode on it, which you see sorts out all our stretching issues that we had before. Now I'm gonna switch over here to vertex mode and add a few extra points to our peel. And the goal is to have that as straight as possible there in the center edge of the upper half of it. And in general, it's always a good practice to have things as straight as possible. And that goes both for horizontal and vertical lines. And let's add one more over there. And now I'm just going to collapse everything and reopen it. Once again, I don't know how else to get rid of these blue control points of the peel mode. And I'm just gonna switch over here to the edge mode. Make sure you're not in element mode. I'm gonna loop that. And with this loop, I'm just gonna make a straighten alignment here. Same on this area here. I'm just gonna select both of these edges. Keep that align vertically button pressed and use the one below here so that it straightens them both at the same time. And it looks like there's a bit of a stretching going on where we just aligned this edge loop here. So I'm just gonna take it again and just bring it over a little bit here to the left side. And that minimizes that effect. The reason why it's important to have that all straight there is that now we can collapse everything and use our symmetry modifier. So I'm gonna flip it and I want to uncheck weld seam at that point, and you will see why in just a moment. Because now all these UV islands are basically double geometry and it's easy for us to separate them out, flip them horizontally, and then with the snapping function, first of all, I want to switch here to vertex. And then down there at that magnet button, that's basically the snap, enables us to snap that handle back together here. Now the other pieces that we separated out earlier, we're going to unwrap them individually. And in order to do that, we will then just collapse everything again here. And then switch over to vertex mode. And let's just weld everything together now. Let's use a minimum threshold, 0.01. So we don't weld too much stuff that we don't want to weld. Let's bring up UV editor again. And I'm gonna take that piece that we have here and I will then use our quick planar on it. And then we can select the whole thing here. And I'm just gonna straighten it there. That already does a pretty decent job, so I'm gonna just leave it as it is. Oh, and now let's go over to element mode and also separate out these pieces that we have there. And now with that thing here selected, I'm just gonna use our cylindrical map button once more on the X align option. Uncheck normalize map like we did earlier. And now it's just a matter of making sure everything's really welded. So I was right clicking that thing and press weld on it. And you can see that now we have really the green borders only where they matter. I'm gonna loop that and straighten it here. And the same goes for these pieces. Let me find the right button here, loop. And I use then the ring option. And now the vertical alignment here. And like I was saying before, it's just better to have everything perfectly straight. Let's grab that piece at the back, also quick planar it. And that already came out perfectly fine. Nothing left to do on that. And then at the front, we have this piece here, which I'm just gonna shift to the side, flip it horizontally and just bring it a bit together there. And let us also use our rescale element button, if I find it, down here. So now everything is again the same texel ratio. I'm just gonna scale it down a bit already. And now that I'm zoomed in here a bit, that looks a bit too stretched here for my taste. So let's just take these vertices. Let's make sure we're not in the element mode. Let's just take them and just bring them down a bit. Around here looks better. And we want to make the same thing on the other side. So in that case, I just bring it up a bit more. And one thing that I forgot when I pressed the rescale element button was to weld together our handle here. So I'm just gonna snap it back in place and weld it. So now it actually stays as one UV island. I'm just going to collapse it. And now I use our attach here with the blade, reopen UV editor again, and I will then just make a selection for everything and use rescale elements once more, followed by the pack together button. And one of the things that is new in 3D Max 2017 is this multi-tile button, this one there. And spoiler alert, we will create a so-called non-square texture. And for that, we want to fit everything into 2 of these tiles here. So let's use the scale button here. Let's just bring everything a little further down here so that we max out these 2 tiles that we see there. And I will just get the big pieces out of the way and use the pack button here on all the small stuff, so that we have that a bit more compact there. And now it's time to fit the blade and the handle, at least the biggest pieces of them, into these 2 UV tiles. And I want to put the blades like that, as if they are basically facing each other. And that handle here can fit into the center of the 2. And I'm going to give it a horizontal flip here so that it doesn't intersect there. And also, now that I look at it, I actually want to separate out these screw elements that we have there. So I will just select them here in the viewport. And then I want to also grow the selection over here. And then just right click it and break it in the UV editor so that we have them as separate UV islands. And with Alt and Control, we can scale that thing here a little bit more down, because we really don't want to have any intersection on it at all. And before, we had a bit of an intersection there. So now it's time to pack the rest of these pieces here. And I'm just going to fit that in that corner there, which already seems to be working quite well. Let's see about it if we zoom in. A bit more up. And certainly these pieces that we have there, we want to make sure they are not in the blade. So let me just grab them here one by one and put them somewhere else where they're not in the way. That small piece here, that long stripe, I'm gonna position it somewhere up there. Once again, we're fitting everything in these 2 UV tiles here because we're creating a non-square texture. If it was a square texture, we would be wasting too much space because we have this blade, which is ideal for being non-square. Let's just make sure everything fits. And now it's really just a matter of looking at our individual UV islands. Like every element is a UV island, and we just want to make the best use of the space that we have here, while avoiding that stuff intersects. So this one here can definitely be there at the bottom. And we have a few more pieces here on that side, and I'm just gonna use the pack button again. But in the end, it's better to just take piece by piece and make sure that it fits in there. It's a bit like a puzzle or Tetris. And this can go over here. That's usually also the part of the UV mapping that I actually enjoy doing. I really don't enjoy the actual unfolding part and making sure this and that UV island is properly unwrapped, but fitting it all into our UV canvas, I don't think that's such a bad thing. There are also tools for it. Like some of you asked me, why don't I make use of some of the tools that are out there? For example, I know there's one called I Pack That. But basically what these tools do is they have a packing algorithm and they do a really good job on that. But for the tutorials, I just want to use the default tools that the software comes with, just so that really everyone can follow. Because each one of these third-party software, they cost a bunch of money. Well, I don't know how much, probably not too expensive, but I just can't expect someone to follow the tutorial here and then I tell you all of a sudden, and now you have to buy this $30 plugin in order to follow through with the rest. And I think it's also better to really learn the default tools. I'm actually gonna grab these edges here, make a loop, or at least until here, and I'm gonna straighten it, make use of that tool again. Let me just zoom in there, make sure we don't have some weird stretching going on. Just so that when we bake our normal map later, we don't have any of these steps. That's also the reason why I want to have everything as straight as possible. And from here on, it's really just a matter of making sure we don't have our UV islands too close to each other. And the thumb rule is usually 8 pixel distance for a 4K texture. But usually I just eyeball that. I'm going to install a tool now. It's called Text Tools. You're probably already familiar with it if you followed my other tutorials. So all you have to do is download that thing and drag it into the viewport. It's a free tool. And as soon as it's installed, it's ready to be used. And one of the most important features is smoothing groups from UV shells, which we already applied here. So now we can collapse everything. It adds modifiers on top of our UV editor, which we then can collapse. And now it created, like the name suggested, a smoothing group for each UV shell, which is exactly what we need to bake our normal map later on. So now all we have to do is reopen the UV editor, select everything, right-click %snap toggle, and put a % amount of 50. And with that snap toggle still activated, we switch over to scale mode and fit everything into our 1 UV tile window here. Later, when we're going to bake out our textures, we're going to define the resolution that is non-square. So if it looks really distorted right now, don't worry about it. That's going to be perfectly fine once we start texturing later and export our textures. So now I collapse everything. And I actually want to separate out these two elements here. I'm gonna call that the kukri blade _ low. And our grip over here, kukri _ grip _ low. And now it's really important that we name our highpoly exactly the same. The only difference is that we're gonna call it _high at the end. Also, I just wanna apply a material here called kukri. Gonna apply it here to the highpoly first. And now we really wanna make sure that everything that is that grip here, we're gonna call it kukri _ grip _ high. That would be the kukri blade _ high. And then if you remember that from the other tutorials, for the case you followed them, everything that is a floater object, first of all, I'm just gonna collapse it here, makes it easier. And then with our attach feature here, we make one object out of it. And I want to go over here to our tools or utilities and give it a reset X form. Make sure you collapse it. And if you look at it here from the top perspective, we could make a bit more of a nicer job here on following that shape, for which FDD free modifier is just the perfect tool. I'm gonna collapse that. And now I'm gonna center our pivot here to 0. Use our mirror tool and make a copy over here to the other side, because previously we didn't have that floater geometry there on the other side. Now we do. Gonna attach it and make sure that these floater objects, or one object actually, is also called kukri underscore grip underscore high. And we are nearing the end of our modeling tutorial here. If you look at that here, that looks a bit too soft. So I'm gonna grab that edge there, this one right there, and I want to put the crease up to 1. Do the same thing here for that edge and give it a second to update. And now it doesn't look so soft, so that's better there for that part where it's supposed to be really sharp. And let's also bring up the reference image again. I want to add this groove here to the blade. I think it's called the fuller. And for that, I'm gonna switch over here to our edge mode and make a ring selection. And I'm gonna deselect the edges that I don't want to connect. Let's grab this edge here as well, and let's just use the connect here. I'm just gonna give it one edge here, or one edge loop. Go over to the edge constraint, bring it all the way up, and now just on the Z-axis, bring it a bit down again. And now let's use extrude. Make sure you put that to 0 and 0, and then we go from there. And if you press Alt while you change these sliders here, you can make these really short distances more precise. And I'm gonna have it somewhere around here. And then just confirm it. And I will then switch over here to vertex mode and just collapse these 3 vertices that we have. And I also want to connect those. And let's switch back to our edge mode. Take these edges that we have there, convert it to a face selection, and give it an auto smooth. And back to our edge mode here. Let's make a ring selection around that whole object and put the crease amount to 1. And let's see what it looks like here with Open Subdiv. The more subdiv iterations we have on it, the longer it takes to load. But that definitely looks like it's gonna make a nice high poly later on. And let's go back to our low poly model. I want to also apply that kukri material that we created earlier. That's important for Substance Painter later. And I'm gonna isolate here the blade, make a connection up there, and just connect a few more things. Take these vertices here and just make some edge connections. Just so that we are on the safe side, that we don't have any overlapping. Even though I don't see any. Like usually if you don't see any overlap in 3D Max, that means you're good to go. But there's also another reason why I make these edge connections here. And the reason is that this whole piece down there with that hole in it, I find it too thick. And I want to give it a bit of an angle. And for that, I will connect these edges here. This is an optional step, like you don't have to follow that if you like the shape as it is. But if you look at it here, I just find it too thick and I would like to have it narrowing down there. And the only downside is that we already fixed our high poly model here with that inset. That makes it kind of hard for us to fix it with the FDD. And in order to work with that geometry better, I'm gonna make that face selection, convert it to edge, and then just get rid of these edges here in the center. Deselect them. And now I can press Ctrl Backspace. And I just need to fix this one here manually. So while I make these edge connections here, let me also bring up the low poly so that we see where our edges align, and that's crucial here for making that operation with the FDD that we're about to make. Just gonna connect that here as well. It's kind of hard to see if it's completely overlaying with the low poly and the high poly. So let me just grab the high poly here once more and isolate it. Let me get rid of this edge there, Control Backspace. And this one here, I'm just gonna connect it over to the other side. Or let's just cut it. So we have some more edges there on the side as well. Back here to our view, both with the low poly and the high poly. What I want to do here with our high poly selected still is collapse the symmetry modifier on it. And now I'm going to select the both of them, low and high poly. And I want to add the edit poly modifier. And I select these faces here all the way up there. F3 helps to see a little bit better what we're up to there. I also want to select these faces that we have here. Just to be clear, right now we're selecting both our high poly and the low poly. Double faces, you could say. And now it's finally time to use our FDD modifier here, FDD2. And select these control points at the bottom, go over to the scale mode. And now I can finally do what I wanted to do earlier already. And since we do it so late in the process, it created a bit of this extra work here, a little bit messy because we had to get rid of the inset and then make sure that the edges are perfectly aligned up there. But sometimes you just see something later on and then you want to make these changes, and now we really have something here that I'm very happy with. Let's go back here to our high poly and add our open subdiv once more. And since we got rid of the inset here earlier, now this is all messed up again. So it's time to do one last operation here. And I'm just gonna select these faces. I don't need them here in the center. And I'm just gonna use inset here on it once more. And like we did earlier, I want to bring these edges down a bit more, because with the open subdiv, it's always looking at our edge distance. And that's why everything should be having the same distance. We still have the crease information for the most parts. And now it's time to use our slice tool here and cut it off here on the right side. So I'm gonna split it and slice, split and slice, and just delete here the right side. And then use our symmetry once more. Flip that. And there are maybe a few more things that I would like to fix. Like all that here looks a little bit too soft again. So that would be really the last step before we export. I want to select those edges that just looked a bit too soft and deselect everything that we don't want to affect. Gonna change the crease amount on those. And it's really those teeth there, those saw teeth. And that will be the last operation that we do before we export. So let's just make sure we really only select those edges here. And I also don't want to use the ones there at the center. It's only the ones here on the side that I want to affect, as well as those ones there, right at the end of these teeth. So I'm gonna select those manually here. And I have to do the same here on that side. Let's go over to top perspective, press Alt and just deselect everything. And then let's just select individually these edges here. And only a few more left here on that side as well. And then once we have that selection, I will then show our end result here with the open subdiv on top. I'm gonna change it to 0.6 decrease amount. Just make it a little bit harder than it was before. It's supposed to be a sharp looking object. And one last time, I'm zooming in here on that region. And I want to select this edge there. And I'm gonna put the crease amount up to 0.7. And I'm gonna select these two edges here as well. And 0.4 seems to be quite nice there. I really want that to look sharp. And this edge up here, let's see, I'm gonna put it to 1. And now you can see there's a bit of this blurry shadow effect. And that's the problem with the open subdiv. It's always based on the edge distance. So switching over to the cut tool here, I'm gonna just make some edge loops or support loops, you could call it, to minimize this effect. It's a little bit slow because I'm working here with our end result on, which means it has to calculate the open subdiv while I do that. But other than that, now we're in a good shape here. One last look around. And since this is our highpoly model here, I just want to switch over to our cut tool once more. Make sure you deselect the split option, or else you really split your geometry as you cut. And Control backspace this edge here. And also just follow that path here. Just makes it for a nicer edge flow when we have our open subdiv on. So that our normal map will look perfect. And we are only minutes away from baking it. There's one thing that I want to do. I find that grip here a little bit too small compared to the blade. So we'll select both of the low poly and the high poly. Switch over here to our scale mode. And just eyeball it a bit, like scale it a little bit up. Let's just make sure that the handle is still in place where it's supposed to be. And now I'm gonna hide the low poly. Have one last look here at the high poly. Because I'm afraid that these edges here might be a little too soft. And I know you're probably thinking, we did that already so many times now, but it's just important. It's the last step before we bake our normal map. And I'm just gonna select these edges once more here. Only these. And I'm gonna crank it up to a 0.4 crease. So now that we have it, we are certainly ready to export our objects here. And since we already have the high poly selected here, I'm just gonna go over to export, export selected, go in my knife_substance folder, and I want to export it as an OBJ. I'm gonna call it kukri_HP. We don't need the texture coordinates on it. And I'm just gonna export it from here. And then do the same thing for our low poly as soon as this is done here, but as an FBX. So now let's hide our high poly folder, bring up the layer manager once more, hide the high poly, select our low poly, and export selected as FBX, and that's it. kukri_LP for low poly. And that brings us to the end of our modeling tutorial. And I just want to add a few words at the end, which is that if you are familiar with my other tutorials, the AKM and the grenade, and more tutorials which will appear in the future, you will know that I prefer the chamfer and turbo smooth method usually to create my high poly model. I think it gives more flexibility and control over the crease, and we don't have to select every single edge and define a crease amount in there. It's just easier to control it straight for the smoothing groups. But regardless of that, I thought for this tutorial it would be interesting to show a different method, which is also very popular. A lot of people like to use the open subdiv, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the Substance Painter part where we will bake and texture our kukri knife. See you there.